stuck into this webinar on how to use fungicides sustainably in production nurseries. What we will do is talk briefly about the project under which these webinars are funded, how fungicides work, best practice fungicide usage, how to manage an outbreak if they do occur, and fungicide resistance management. So each section is fairly short, but they are heavy, so write your questions at any time and we will answer them at the breaks that we will have throughout the webinar. So firstly, this webinar is just a small component of a larger project that has run between 2016 and the end of this year. We've produced a lot of fact sheets, pest management plans, contingency plans, other resources for Green Life Industry Australia, and most of these are on the Nursery Production FMS website in the technical information. So there are a lot of resources there. My advice is to use the search function. The search function works really well on this website, so you can type in any number of topics, whether it's a specific pest or disease or disinfestation, growing media, irrigation. Heaps of resources are available. We have one of the best production nursery industry peak bodies that has a huge amount of information available for businesses in that industry. So make use of these. We also, as Sarah said, we run a diagnostic lab called Grow Help Australia. We're not the only lab in Australia, obviously. Each state and territory has its own diagnostics. You can use us if you wish. You receive contract rates as a production nursery. We're doing other educational work with workshops, not this year because of COVID-19, but in previous years we've done workshops. We're doing extra webinars this year. We provide some biosecurity support to GIA as well. All right, so how do fungicides work? Okay, so fungicides at a really basic level, they stop or inhibit fungal growth, sporulation, and or germination of spores. Different fungicides work differently, and it's pretty profound, but they target different aspects of the physiology of fungi. So it might be the way protein formation occurs, or the way energy is produced, or cause the fungus to not be able to produce energy. It might change some aspect of cell signaling or cell function in some way. It's quite complicated, and there are a lot of different ways that fungicides kill fungi. Knowing the exact details of these aren't really all that important, but knowing that there are differences is important. So if we consider this really basic disease life cycle, we've got some spores and maybe they arrive in the nursery via the water or in the air, or however they do. They might land on the plant, they'll germinate, just like a seed, put down a root-like structure to try and get into the plant, infect the plant, then that colonization may occur where it grows. This disease then occurs, which is the symptom of the pathogen, and they'll then eventually produce some more spores, and away we go. So in this section up here, we have no symptoms occurring. In this section, what we want to use are protectant products. And so there are a few different types of fungicide products. You've probably all heard of protectant products, things like your coppers and mancozebs and whatnot. These products stay on the outside of the plant and they inhibit germination, and they will inhibit fungal growth on the outside of the plant. They don't go into the plant. So the next type of product are these penetrant curative products. So once they're in the plant, you need a product that goes into the plant. It sounds obvious, makes sense. So these types of fungicides will move into the plant to inhibit fungal growth. They are more effective early on in the infection and colonization phase of the disease life cycle. The next group of fungicides are called eradicant fungicides, and they are also mobile inside the plant, and they'll inhibit fungal growth and also sometimes sporulation. So this just helps to visualize if the type of fungicides you might need to use depending on where you are in the life cycle. All right. So in more detail, your protectant products, they provide that barrier, doesn't go into the plant. So they need to be applied to healthy tissue. If the pathogen is already in the plant, these protectant fungicides are going to have limited effect, except from the point of view of stopping further infection. So you need to keep you will have to repeat applications during high pest pressure to keep your plants protected. So as we said, fungal activity on the plant surface can be inhibited, and they can be quite effective products for things like your powdery mildew, sometimes downy mildew, botrytis, other fungi that are present on the outside of the plant and produce spores on the outside of the plant can be inhibited by these products. But it does not stop colonization or symptom development or spore production that might happen inside the plant. These products are generally less prone to resistance, fungicide resistance, that is, and we'll talk about that more later in the webinar. Okay, so the next group of fungicides are those penetrant curative fungicides. They also will provide a barrier stopping infection, and they enter the plant. Some products are what they call translaminar. You can just raise your hand if you understand what translaminar means, please. And some are more systemic. So we've got a couple of hands raised, but not all. So what we will do is just describe that. So translaminar products move across the leaf surface. I'll just put your hands down, thank you. So they'll move across the lamina, which is your leaf. So it'll go from the top to the bottom or the bottom to the top, but they don't move from one leaf to another the way that more systemic products do. Now, research on these type of products will show that they are most effective very early in the infective stage. So if there is a case where the research that's done, what they'll do is they'll infect a plant on purpose, they'll apply the product at various stages after the infection, and what that research does is show that for these products, you really need to apply them in the first few days to have the best efficacy and reduce symptoms and infection the greatest. These products are relatively prone to resistance compared to the protectant products that we talked about previously. Just a moment, having trouble getting to the next page. Here we go. Okay, so as we said, they're best applied before symptoms occur. And again, you probably will need to repeat applications during high pest pressure. And we'll explain what that means, repeat applications, because it doesn't mean just applying the same product. That's more likely to increase the risk of fungicide resistance. So we'll talk about that more later. The foliage produced after application are not protected. So just keep that in mind. That's part of the reason you need to repeat application. So if there's plant growth after the application, they're not as protected, or they're not protected. These products do not always stop sporulation, and the whole curative name is a little misleading. They don't actually cure plants. Like with any symptom, once a plant has dead tissue, it's not like people where you can sometimes heal. That tissue is always dead. All right. The last group of fungicides are these eradicant fungicides. They're more active in the later stages of colonization and may also be active to stop or reduce sporulation. So they're more likely to be effective further down the track. But again, if you have many symptoms, these products are going to struggle to manage your problem. They are also variably systemic, so some will be translaminar, some will be systemic, and some products will have curative and eradicant properties. And like your curative products, they are relatively prone to resistance. And again, it's misleading. They don't actually eradicate fungi. Okay, it gets a little bit heavy, so bear with me. If you're not familiar with this, you can watch it again later. Fungicides kill fungi in different ways, as we've said, and they have different mode of action groups. So you can download this poster from the Fungicide Resistance Action Committee, the FRAC website. But basically, all we want to do is, the take-home message here is each one of these boxes is a different mode of action group. And each mode of action group is given a number. Fungicides used to have only a letter, or were mainly summarized by a letter, but we ran out of letters and we only have 26. So we've gone to numbers, and you'll see group 11 fungicide, or group 1 fungicide, group 3 up to, I can't remember how many there are, but there's more than 40. So as opposed to your insecticides, which also have a number and perhaps a letter, but they'll say group 4A insecticide. So just keep that in mind. Most labels have this, but not all. So you may need to go searching for your mode of action group. Those products with an M1, M2, up to I think it's M5, maybe there are more now, they have what's called multi-site activity. So these products kill fungi in multiple ways simultaneously. And because they have a multiple mode of action, they're less likely to have resistance occur. And in fact, there are no known cases of field resistance to these multi-site fungicides. That's not to say that it can never occur, but there's less risk, because if a fungus, well, actually, we're going to talk about that more when we get to the fungicide resistance management component of the webinar. But this will help when it comes to understanding best practice fungicide applications, which we'll talk about soon. Okay, so mode of action groups, well, we have a group 11 where there's one number. What it means is it generally only has one way of killing the fungus. The fungicide kills the fungus in one way. Sometimes a chemical will perhaps kill it in more than one way, or maybe a small number of ways, but generally it's one trait. If a fungus occurs that is adapted to be able to withstand that, resistance may then occur. That's why resistance is more likely to occur in those eradicant and curative groups, because they generally kill the fungus in just one way. So what chemical companies have done is started producing products that have multiple modes of action in the same bottle. So you might see products that say group 4 M1. And so this includes a eradicant or a curative product at the same time as your protectant product. So it has multiple modes of actions, and that will reduce the risk of fungicide resistance and give a broader activity. Okay. So at this point, do we have any questions?
Yes, we do have one here, Andrew, asking, is it a good idea to mix different fungicides from different fungicide groups, for example, curative and penetrant?
Okay. So mixing chemicals can be quite effective. It certainly is an effective way of reducing the risk of producing fungicide resistance. What you have to be careful when you're mixing products that haven't been formulated as a mix, you can potentially get pesticide incompatibility. So you've got to be aware of the type of product that it is, whether it's, the names are just dropped out of my head, but whether it's, there's a set of rules for reducing the risk of pesticide incompatibility, and what I can do is I'll send a link after the webinar to to the people that registered with more information. That's an important point. Hopefully that answers the question.
There's another question here. Why are protectants better to use than penetrants when penetrants do more?
Okay. So I guess it depends on your purpose. So your protectants, I mean, I'm not sure, let's see, do they do more? They do different. Their purposes are different. So your protectants, in some ways, more broad spectrum, but they don't go into the plant. So if you're protecting your plants, they're in some ways better. Whereas if you have a risk of infection or you have some infection, those protectants will help protect the plant, but it won't stop the fungus that's already in the plant. So it's not necessarily that one of them is better than the other, it's that they are different. They have different purposes, and you need to understand that purpose so that you can use them most effectively.
Yep.
All right.
Okay, I think that's all the questions we've got.
Okay, we will move right along. Thank you, Sarah. All right, so best practice fungicide usage is where we're going next. What you'll see here is that there are some parallels to the previous webinar on managing your cultural practices to prevent entry of pathogens. And anything that reduces the number of fungicide applications that you're applying, putting on your crop, will help you. Okay. So best practice, put things in place so that you stop entry of the pathogen, that you reduce pesticide pressure. And these things are, we're going to only touch on them very briefly because we spent a whole hour on it previously. So make sure that all of your inputs are free of pathogens, whether it be your water, your media, the propagative material. Make sure that your growing practices are producing are optimal to produce healthy plants. These things will make your plants be more resilient. They'll be less likely to be prone to infection. Monitoring your plants for their health, the crop health, is really important to be able to apply your fungicides most effectively, so that you find the problem at the early stages. if you've got it at the early stages, you can put your application on at the early stages and protect the most number of your plants. It also helps you understand pest pressure. At what point is this pathogen actually a problem? You don't want to know that the problem is there when it's in half of your plants. You want to know when there's one or a very small number. Then you can generate a risk period for a particular host plant or a group of host plants and build a management plan to reduce the risk of having diseases on those plants. And the last thing, for when you're monitoring your plants, if you monitor before an application and after an application, that can help you establish whether those products have been effective. And it can also be helpful if in the early stages when you're trying to develop your plan particularly, or when you're changing your plan, you may want to just pull a few plants aside and not apply the product to those plants. What happens? Has your product actually been effective compared to the plants that have not received the application? Because we're not really interested in feel-good activities. We want to actually have an effective strategy, not just think we have an effective strategy and apply the product because it makes us feel like we're doing something. Because that is definitely in the human psychology. When we feel like we're doing something, we feel better about ourselves. I don't know. When you're considering applying a fungicide, don't assume that that fungicide will solve your problem. In fact, it's sometimes better to assume the exact opposite. This fungicide isn't going to work. Okay, well, why will it work? Why will this solve my problem? And before you apply it, check other things to make sure that they aren't the real problem. Is your root health? How is your root health? Are they healthy? Are they unhealthy? How is the stem crown vascular tissue? What is your growing media and your water, pH and EC? Are your irrigation practices, your fertilizer regime, are they optimal? Are there other aspects of your growing environment which could be causing stress on the plants, which are then inducing or making your plants more prone to a disease? Is the problem bacterial? Because there's no point in putting on a fungicide if the problem is bacterial, with the exception of copper products. And even then, you have to be even more proactive, because once your plants have a bacterial disease, they basically always have it. So you need to be very proactive to protect your healthy plants to stop those bacterial infections. They're quite challenging, and there are fact sheets on bacterial pathogens, and also there's a fact sheet on copper products and the differences between copper products on the FMS website. And again, other fact sheets. So if you check your plant health, your stem, your root health, or stem vascular tissue, and all those things, and you see that there is a bit of a root rot, it's quite likely, whether that root rot is caused by a disease or, let's say, a low oxygen or an anoxic condition, that could be your primary problem. If you apply a fungicide to solve, let's say, a leaf spot problem, and there are some underlying issues that are causing the actual plant stress, all you're doing is putting a Band-Aid on your plants with the fungicide. You're deferring the problem for next time and putting yourself into a situation where you will have to repeatedly put on fungicides and not solve the real problem. And that's part of the reason why we want to identify the cause, the source of your real problem. So if you go through a process like this and you come to the conclusion, this is a real pathogen, a real fungal leaf spot or a root rot problem that's caused by a fungus a fungal pathogen, yeah, maybe then it is worth putting on your fungicide. Okay, and as we've said, fungicides can be very effective at protecting plants. So for these best practice fungicide usage sort of recommendations that we're putting out here, we're going to separate them for leaf spot pathogens, and then later on in a moment, we'll talk about root and other pathogens. Okay, so for leaf spots, as we've said previously, know the high risk period. All of this best practice fungicide usage is designed to protect your plants, because if your pathogen is there, then you're behind the 8 ball. If you've got a disease present, rather, you're behind the 8 ball. So leading up to your high risk periods, put on your protectant products. Then during the highest risk periods, and this is based on your knowledge of the pathogen cycle in your nursery and the pest pressure at your nursery, then you apply, perhaps in combination, eradicant and or curative products, maybe with your protectant products, to keep your plants healthy. This is the best way to then not have a disease problem. It's a bit different for root and vascular pathogens. Fungicides don't eradicate these pathogens. They're basically systemic in the plant. Fungicides will mask their presence. What that means is you might not get disease, you might not get the symptoms, but the pathogen is still present. And best practice is, well, we recommend not selling plants that have had a root pathogen, a root rot, or a vascular pathogen, because it's going to spread that pathogen as you sell it. So that's fairly simple, and that can be difficult from a practical perspective for your business. From a pathology perspective, if you are selling plants that have a pathogen, that's bad. So all of these best practice, for all fungicides, early use is best. And different products will be more or less effective depending on the pathogen, the host plants, time after infection, all of these things, we've talked about these. Take-home message, record your experience and your results so that you can build up that management plan, and when one production manager leaves and another one comes, you've got that body of knowledge. You don't have to build it from scratch again. All right, so we're going to change gears a little bit and talk about biological control of pathogens, because it can be effective, but it's also a little bit tricky. Okay, so the fundamentally, bacteria and fungi are everywhere. Some bacteria and fungi are antagonistic towards other bacteria and or fungi, some of which can be pathogens. So the idea is that you're using these bacteria or these microorganisms to fill the area and make it more difficult for your pathogens to enter. So there are commercial products that are either bacterial, they're bacteria or they're a fungal species, and they can have some benefits. Just out of interest, how many people use a trichoderma or a bacillus or some other product that the biological to help manage either plant growth or reduce disease? Just raise your hand. Okay, no one. Wow, okay. So this can be quite helpful, particularly after you've, let's say, pasteurized your media. The media is then effectively a void. There may be nothing living in that media. If you then fill up the space with a species that is either beneficial to plant growth or is at least benign, doesn't hurt the plant, and it stops other fungi from getting in, then it might make your system more resilient. Research down in New South Wales, Len Tesserero, he was described to me that their research showed that there may be more benefit to produce for using products that had multiple species present, so that there's a community in your growing media or on your plant to resist pathogens. Keep in mind that if you're putting on a fungal product, let's say your trichodermas and whatnot, they are killed by fungicides. So if you are drenching your media with a fungicide, then it could easily kill the beneficials that are present in your media. Just one moment. I'm getting some fuzz. I'm going to just solve that. One moment. Okay. Can someone please just raise your hand to show that you can still hear me, please? Yep, I got a few. Thank you very much. We'll continue. Okay. With any of these types of products, when you're thinking about whether or not to use them, whether you're looking at a biological product or a pesticide or fungicide, insecticide, or anything, I like to recommend testing that product. So applying it to a subset of your plants of various different lines, compare the growth on the treated plants versus the untreated plants. And that can give you a sort of quantitative, or at least a qualitative, a method of comparing your growth. And if you're getting better growth on the plants that you've had the treatment, then it can show you that it is actually worthwhile considering to keep that going. You may need to test some products under different growing conditions or different seasons. And I always respect those sales reps of different products that work with you to run these sort of in-field, on-farm experiments more than those that aren't willing to do that. So just keep that in mind. That is a way for you to be able to test whether any product is actually effective. Here, just needing to move to the next slide. Here we go. Okay, so that's the end of that section. Any questions on any of that section?
I've just got one question here, Andrew.
Mm-hmm.
If you apply a biocontrol and you still get disease, what is the best thing to do?
Okay, so if you're getting disease, then we'll actually cover that in the next section, which is managing your outbreak. But basically, you will need to manage that regardless of the biological product that has been applied. So, removing plant tissue, putting on a fungicide if necessary. But we'll cover that more in a moment.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
I've got another one here. How developed is the biocontrol industry relative to fungal issues?
It depends. So, Sarah, you might actually be better equipped to answer that question. Do you want to?
It's been around for a while. Like, it's been the use of biologicals, especially like trichodermas, have been around for like almost 20 years, I think. And they've been improved and developed. With any biological product, there's always an element of uncertainty because so many factors can affect its effectiveness. And it can be like the environment, the host, the media, and all sorts, and how it's applied and everything. So they are a lot more variable in their ability to perform compared to chemicals, which are less affected by those sorts of things. So they have been around for a while, and there is some good data to suggest that they are effective. But I I agree with Andrew in that you should, if you're considering using them, you should do a test and compare those that have been treated with those that haven't and see if it works in your circumstance. And do you want to add anything to that, Andrew?
No.
So we have another. Yep, we've got another question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a list with curative and eradicant fungicides?
Yes. Particularly devoted to fungal leaf spots, because they're the ones that you really can manage extraordinarily quite well with fungicides, and that is in the fungal leaf spot management plan, as well as the sort of companion document looking at fungicide resistance management plan. I'll put those links for those documents in the email that I send out either later on today or tomorrow. But they are on the Nursery Production FMS website. If you do a search for leaf spot management plan, it should come up, or even just leaf spot. Yep.
Okay. Well, I think that's it for... actually, no, there's another one.
Yes, yeah. Robert.
Is there a website?
Yep.
Is there a website that would tell me whether the fungicide is systemic, translaminar, or protectant?
So there's the fact sheet that we developed. We researched the products and individually assigned whether they were translaminar or systemic or protectant. Unfortunately, I'd love to see the product label have that sort of information present in all cases. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. So that's why we produced those fact sheets with that in mind, so that it's easy to get that information. So you'll get the link. All right, we might move along because our time is running short. Okay, so managing an outbreak. So this, you'll see some parallels to what we've already discussed, but first of all, it might help. We're just going to make a small comparison between nursery and field production, which might help illustrate some differences that's helpful. So for a production nursery, our main objective is to sell healthy plants and distribute that propagative material free of pathogens and certainly free of disease. If a pathogen is present, regardless of whether a disease is present, so maybe there's a pathogen but no symptoms, that pathogen is distributed. And that's part of the reason why suppressing the pathogen isn't acceptable, because it's just handing the problem to the next link in the chain. Every horticultural industry, production, nursery, and everything else is reliant on starting with healthy plant material. So if you supply a product that's actually not healthy, then it undermines the whole system. You can think about that in COVID-19 related terms in your own brain. Anyway, so the bottom line here is don't sell stock that you would not like to receive yourself. Everyone knows how awful it is to receive stock that's riddled with a leaf spot pathogen or a root rot or mealybugs or whatever. If you wouldn't want to receive it, don't send it out. And if you're in doubt, be transparent with your clients. You'll actually, in my opinion, I suspect you will get more respect from your clients if you're open and transparent than if you try and hide it, and it'll come back to bite. Whereas for field producers, their main objective is to sell a healthy fruit and veg or a healthy food product. It's generally non-propagative. It's designed to be for consumption. So sometimes the plant that's produced that fruit can have some disease present. You can put on a fungicide and suppress that pathogen to get your crop out. Now, it's not all. There can be implications post-harvest, but sometimes it can be possible to get away with that. It's still heavily reliant on starting with healthy plant material. All right, so from that perspective, when you're managing an outbreak, if you have leaf spot pathogens, again, and identify the cause, this will help you to identify the source of the outbreak. Is it floating around in the air? Is it coming in your irrigation water? Is it associated with a certain type of media, whether that is a pathogen or a non-pathogenic, disorder that is associated with your media? You can play with all sorts of different factors to improve plant growth, plant health, such that disease is less likely to occur. We're talking about modifying your growing conditions. And just as we said that you can run tests with different fungicide products, you can run tests with different growing conditions and see what works best for you at your nursery. Again, it's applying fungicides to protect healthy plants. And after I've jumped this one here, you need to remove the infected organic matter. So after you've identified your cause, remove the infected organic matter. The organic matter will have fungal spores or fungal growth that can then potentially get back into the system. So remove it. Any plants that are unsaleable, get out of the system, and preferably remove them from the site. Because if you put them in the chuck out pile that's next to your growing area, then there's more chance that it can get back into the growing area. One of the other issues with suppressing a pathogen, which is relevant to leaf spots as well as root and vascular pathogens, if you suppress the pathogen, then it can still be ticking away at low levels and may well infect other plants without you even realizing it. And you may be propagating the problem without being fully aware. So remove infected organic matter, remove unsaleable plants, modify your growing conditions as much as possible, apply your fungicides to protect healthy plants. And after you're done, or perhaps during, depending on the situation, but maybe when you've cleared that line, disinfest that growing area, whether that is with a quaternary ammonium product or various other disinfectants. Even bleach is great, but I mean, it has its own set of issues. But clean the area, because spores stick and they have a way of holding on and being able to propagate. They want to survive just like we want the plants to survive. Okay, and as we've said, there are leaf spot management plans, fact sheets. There's that fungicide resistance fact sheet that's also quite helpful. All right, similarly for root rots and vascular wilts, it's a little bit more drastic though. Leaf spots, you can get away with putting on your fungicides to protect your healthy plants in a lot of situations if you get it early, particularly. But for root rots, unfortunately, it's even more about being preventative, because once the plant has it, you can't cure your plant. So you want to identify the cause. Once you know the cause, then you can look at the life cycle of that organism, find out where it's coming, where is the entry point. Seriously look at your propagative material. If you've got mother stock plants, is this a vascular wilt that could be present in the mother stock plant without it actually showing symptoms? Because larger plants can be more resilient. Maybe it's just ticking away at a low level. And we have seen cases where the cuttings from a mother stock plant, they just die willy-nilly, but the mother stock plants look mostly healthy until you observe them very closely. So that's the sort of thing that you can do more pointedly when you know the cause of your problem. You've got to remove and discard those diseases off-site. root rot pathogens extraordinarily important. You don't want that growing media present on the site. Most soil-borne organisms, soil-borne pathogens, have resting stages that can survive for decades. And then all it takes is your machinery popping it down, touching that media that's maybe infested, and then going into your growing area, and that's higher risk than if you remove it off-site. Okay, so if you, let's say you have a low incidence of a root rot, you get rid of all of the plants that you know have root rot, then what do? Let's say it's only 10% of the plants. That's still, that's significant. Maybe you want to quarantine the rest. The risk of, if you apply fungicides at that point, there is a risk that you are suppressing the disease, suppressing the pathogen, but it's still potentially present, and then it can spread to other areas of the nursery. So you potentially want to quarantine those plants and observe whether or not further disease occurs. If there is enough, if a significant portion of that consignment is infected, then you've really got to seriously consider, do I chuck out the entire consignment? Is it worth it? And again, you want to disinfest that growing area. We've talked about this sufficiently. I don't think we need to go any further with that. Questions? Sarah, are you there?
Yes. Do we have any? No, I don't think we have any for that particular section.
Okay.
So we can probably just move along.
All right. Yep, we will move along. That's a hard concept because no one wants to throw away plants. But from a pathology point of view, that's the way it is. All right, so fungicide resistance management is the next section. Okay, so fungicide resistance. Okay, who has a basic understanding of what fungicide resistance is, or even a more advanced understanding of what fungicide resistance is? If you can just raise your hand, that would be great. I see at least one. All right, so at a basic level, fungicide resistance occurs when a pathogen is no longer controlled by a fungicide. So what happens is there is a pathogen, it has a fungicide has been effective. It's managed that pathogen well, and then populations occur where that fungicide is no longer controlled by the fungicide. That's called acquired resistance. The reason I say it like that is because there are fungi out there that are tolerant or resilient and have never been controlled by a fungicide. That's different from what we normally consider as fungicide resistance. So when you repeatedly apply a single mode of action group, the fungicide, you have the ability to you may have a situation where there's an individual present that has an adaptation or a mutation such that it survives. When you apply that product continuously or repeatedly, you get rid of all your tolerant individuals and you're left with the one or maybe the small number that are resilient, that can survive. And those individuals can increase and create a population that is resistant to that fungicide. Now, resistance can occur in lots of different ways, just as there are lots of different fungicide mode of actions. there are lots of different fungicide resistance mode of actions. And this can involve the fungus detoxifying the product, so breaking it down, or it may involve a physiological process where the fungicide can't bind to a certain part of the cell, or maybe there's a different pathway that goes around the site so that it can survive. It's complicated. You don't really need to know the exact details, but it is important to have a basic idea that fungicide resistance can occur in lots of different ways. Just trying to move to the next slide, one moment. Okay. The most important management tool for fungicide resistance, to reduce the risk of fungicide resistance, is exactly the same as the best practice use of fungicide. Reduce the need to apply fungicides. Reduce the number of applications. So this involves the same things. Sound like a broken record, sorry. But for your cultural practices are key. Only use fungicides when necessary, as informed by your monitoring, by your history of cropping, by disease pressure. If at all possible, apply to hotspots. And I'm going to ask a question here. Who has had a situation where they have reduced fungicide applications or pesticide applications generally and been able to produce plants that are healthier as a result? Just raise your hand if you have. Yep, we've had one go up pretty immediately. Certainly that's been, we've heard growers say that on a regular basis. Another one, thank you. On a regular basis, we hear this. Growers tell us that pesticide products have an effect on plant growth. Don't get me wrong, fungicides, insecticides, they are very helpful products if they're used in a certain way. Sometimes we need them, but if we can reduce the number of times we apply them, we can produce healthier plants. Okay, so again, reducing fungicide resistance, apply your protectants apply your protectants leading up to the high-risk periods. These are products where fungicide resistance is very difficult. It has lots of different mode of actions. It's just as a byproduct of statistics. The chances of having an individual that has the traits necessary to survive your protectant multi-site products is very low. Whereas it's more statistically likely to have an individual that has the traits to survive a single active ingredient with only one mode of action. So use those products wisely. Put on your protectants leading up to the high risk periods, and then during the high risk periods, put on your penetrant, your curative products, and alternate between the mode of action groups and use multiple mode of action groups. And just trying to move to the next slide. Here we go. And what that means, because people have heard about alternating fungicides and alternating insecticides, I'm sure. What that means is you use one product with one mode of action group, and then the next time you use a different one. And then the next time you use a different one, and so on and so forth. And you may rotate between 3 or 4 different products. So in the case of downy mildew, you may end up using your Group 4 plus M1, which I think is, for example, a Ridamil Gold type product, including your coppers. We generally don't use trade names because we like to be a little bit unbiased in some ways. So we tend to use your mode of action groups and your active ingredients, and then you can decide what trade name and what formulation you use, which one you purchase. And this sort of information is in the leaf spot management plan that we put together. It has a lot of a table at the back, at the end, with many different products and the pathogens that they are registered to manage. So you alternate, and what you want to do is defer to any resistance management strategy that's on the label. If it's not on the label, you may want to look at the CropLife Australia website or the Fungicide Resistance Action Committee website. And I'll put some links in there so where you can search for different active ingredients and see what is recommended to reduce the likelihood of having fungicide resistance occur. And the types of things that may be suggested are a maximum number of consecutive sprays, which is typically 1 or perhaps 2 consecutive sprays, or a maximum number of sprays per season. Or it might say, if you're going to spray between 4 to 6 times in that season, you can apply it twice, but not in consecutive sprays. Something like that. Those are the sorts of things that occur on fungicide resistance management strategies. So we're just nearly at the end here, and we're almost on time. The 4 key points. Diseased plants really can't be cured. Sometimes with leaf spots you can get away with it. Focus on disease prevention, on protecting your plants, and don't overuse fungicides, particularly with the same mode of action group. So you concentrate on using an integrated strategy on your passive cultural strategies to reduce the likelihood of a pathogen being present and reducing the pathogen, the pest pressure. And any questions?
We've just got one here, Andrew. If the reason to reduce fungicide use is to prevent the risk of promoting resistant spores taking over, how often do resistant spores get produced?
Yes, okay. That is, I'm not going to have a specific answer to that question. What I'll paint is a scenario where if you have a situation that has a large number of spores, let's say, or a large number of pathogen individuals, if you want, so a lot of fungal growth, a situation where there's a high inoculum load in your crop, and you apply many fungicide applications to try and manage that. The risk of inducing fungicide resistance is higher than if there was a very small inoculum load with only a few spores present. So it's a numbers game. The more pests or the more pathogens you have present, and the more you spray, the more likely you are to have a resistance problem. Hopefully that answers the question. Do you have anything to add to that, Sarah?
No, I think, that pretty much answers that. We have a request to go back to the last slide. Someone wants to have another look at it.
Yep. This one?
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay.
And
just type in
questions at this stage.
Okay. What we will be doing is we'll be getting this webinar online. I've had a little bit of trouble with the last one getting it there. I'm a scientist, not a media communications person, so bear with me. We will get it up on the playlist, and I'll send that link to you in the email that I send out. All right. If there's no further questions, then thank you for attending, and we'll get an email out and a survey out soon. If you can fill in that survey, it will be great. This helps us to understand how effectively this communication has impacted your business, which assists in more of similar types of resources becoming available to you. All right. Well, thank you very much, and I'll close it off. Catch you next time.